Hello, everybody. I think we're live. Um, Welcome to NonSequitur. I was just telling Steve that the feud between ourselves and Jilly Juice seems to be escalating a little bit. I was just informed that she was actually calling out scientist Mel and her credentials and referring to herself as an actual scientist instead of Mel, which is hilarious. But Steve,
Yeah, she said that any scientist would understand her protocols and that Mel wasn't a scientist. Well, Mel has two master's degrees, one master in science, one master in arts and science education. She also has two bachelor's degrees, I think one in chemistry and one in biology. I consider that to be a scientist. I mean, I don't know what qualifications she thinks a scientist would have that she has, because she has nothing. And
I can
you
tell you.
guys, well, didn't Mel kind of touch on her protocol a little bit? I mean, and I say the
Yeah.
word protocol laughably because what she had is not a scientific protocol.
Well, it's a poo call, I think. That's what
Yeah,
it more technically
drink
would
the
be.
juice, shit, and see how you feel. Protocol.
Right. Perfect. Okay. So enough about Jilly Juice. We're going to talk about for the Smoking Nun tonight. And I think that you guys are in for a treat, by the way, because I have actually been trying to. Dr. Anderson, when did we first make contact with you? It was several
Well,
months
goodness, that
ago.
was several months ago because it was before I went into the field this summer, and we held off on this until I got back.
Right. So this has been a long time coming, and I am super stoked to hear about the lost city of Z. And we're to start out, we're going to talk about something that is topical, and actually, it's headed my way. I'm dead smack in the middle of North Carolina, and so I figured that it would be kind of pertinent to talk about hurricanes. So let's rock it, Dave. Hustle from flow. You gotta give me props for that, Steve.
That's pretty good.
Thank you. All right, go. So
We're not talking about waterfalls this time, though, right? That kind of flow.
correct,
Okay, good.
correct. You can go ahead, Dave. Dave. There we go. Okay, so I'm going to let Steve kind of explain how this works, or Dr. Anderson, because I know that we were talking before the show, and he um, has some familiarity with hurricanes being from Louisiana. This is a science thing, and everybody knows I don't science. So the guy who does science, Steve, do you want to take this one away?
Well, I'm not a meteorologist, but I mean, I'll give it a shot. The way I understand cyclonic activity like this, basically, you start off with this warm, humid air above the ocean, and it starts rising. And as it rises, it cools off, and the heat that comes out of this rising of the air starts cooling off the top layers, causing it to be unstable. And as that happens, it causes a high pressure because you have heat being radiated. So you have high pressure air coming out. And so you have this convection that starts forming. And as it does, it starts churning like this, and that can cause cyclonic activity, which eventually goes from more of a vertical to a horizontal. Same thing for a tornado, very similar principle, but it's all due to a difference in warm air and cool air and difference in humidity, from the way I understand it, from a very, very basic point of view.
And how does that sound, Dr. Anderson? Did he nail it?
That fits very well from how I understand it. But I deal with things in the dirt, so
Perfect. All right. So we get that they have killer winds, and the storm surge is devastating. That's what you need to take away from a hurricane. But the important thing to note on these is, we'll go to the next one, Dave. That with hurricanes, they're ranked on what's called a Saffir-Simpson scale. All right, go to the next one. There are 5 different categories of hurricanes, and let me pull up my notes here. As you can see on your screen, from category 1, the winds are an average of 74 to 95 miles per hour. The storm surge can be 4 to 5 feet, and they damage shrubbery, trees, foliage, anything that's unanchored. Okay, the next one, Dave. Category 2s kick it up to about 110 miles an hour. The damage is moderate. Some trees will fall down, major damage to mobile homes, and considerable damage to pipes. Now we get into by the way, that's what hurricane flow is right now. Currently, it's a Category 2. Category 3s, the winds can get in excess of 135 miles per hour. The best example of this one was Hurricane Katrina in 2005, which devastated Louisiana. Dr. Anderson, were you there during Katrina?
I was, yeah, I was living in New Orleans at the time. I went to grad school in New Orleans, and so I was, I think, on one of the very last planes out of New Orleans before that storm.
Oh man, that's did you lose anything like property wise?
No, I was really, really quite lucky. I mean, there was tremendous damage for so many folks, but I was out of town for a month and a half or so, and when we finally got back, there was minor roof damage, and a little bit of water damage on some, like a set of of copied files that I had. So I was very, very lucky, really, in the end.
That is luck. All right, let's go to Category 4. Let me find my. There we go. All right, now these the winds can get up to 155. The storm surge, which is the most dangerous part once it makes landfall, can be 13 to 18 feet. Galveston is an example of that in 1900. The failure of roofs happens during these categories. Inland flooding as far as 6 miles, damage to lower floors. I'm sorry, and major erosion. And then the Category 5s, which are absolutely catastrophic. The winds are greater than 156 miles an hour. The storm surge is upwards of 20 feet, and these have severe damage to exteriors, windows. The roofs fail during this, and then in some cases, complete building failures. So, go to the next one, Dave. An entry that I found, I'm going to go into the cool sciencey parts of this. There was a chance that back in August, Hurricane Lane was going to come in direct contact with the Hawaii, Kilauea. So, Steve, what do you think would happen in a battle between a hurricane and a volcano?
I'm gonna go with the hurricane, actually.
Okay, but what do you think will happen, like
Well, I mean,
event-wise in Spain?
you have ash going up in the upper stratosphere, so the hurricane is going to basically redistribute all that heat around and ash everywhere. It's going to be a mess.
And Dr. Anderson, do you have a guess as to which ones would be the most prevailing force?
Uh, there's a whole awful lot of variables in here because, I mean, volcanoes, I think, have done some of the greatest damage compared to hurricanes. But I think your average, as a non-specialist in this, I'd say your average hurricane is worse than your average volcanic eruption. But the really bad volcanic eruptions, I think, are the worst.
Like a super caldera event. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep,
yeah. Like when Yosemite goes up, we're all screwed.
I agree. I've said that same thing. When that happens, we're overdue actually by like 60,000 years, which is also the scary part. But actually, you're both wrong. What happens when a hurricane goes over a volcano is that it sucks up the lava and becomes a lava cane, and that will probably wipe out most of humanity. And also, you get sharknadoes. Sharknadoes happen. So
with the volcano, they create the sharks.
Right. Yeah.
Lava cane.
Dr. Anderson was, and both of you are actually right. What happens is the volcano, in most cases, actually strengthens the hurricane because of the temperature. Yeah.
Yeah.
It actually, they call them a hypercane when that happens. But unfortunately,
that makes sense because it's feeding thermal energy into the system.
Yeah. Now, this right here is a image of Hurricane Flo as she approaches landfall. It is a beast. So go to the next one. What could we do you think, to stop these in the future? There are two mainstream, I guess, most likely scenarios of how we would be able to kind of not prevent, but alter how catastrophic these hurricanes would be. Steve, do you have any guesses on how we would do that?
Well, I know one is prayer.
Right. Yes, but that goes without saying.
Okay. The other one, I don't know, seeding it with something possibly. I don't know.
Good.
Trying to diminish the energy level.
Good. Okay, Dave, go to the next slide. That's basically what it is. You fly a bunch of planes up above the hurricane, and they seed soot into the hurricane.
I pull that out of my ass, by the way. I had not prepared anything for this, people. I had not even looked at this prior to the show, so I'm pulling this out of my ass.
It's true. The soot kind of weakens the vortex. So you can go to the next one and the next one, Dave. So that's basically what Steve just said, and then the next one too is cloud seeding. So way to spoil the fun, Steve. All right, here's the other method though.
I'm a good guesser.
This is the method that Bill Gates sort of put together. You can go to the next one, Dave. The hurricane killer. Now, what this does is it takes a floating tub in certain strategic locations outside of where the hurricane's path is going to cross. And you have a conduit for warm water and an up conduit for cold water. And these, let's see, it says it turns a turbine generating power to turn the second turbine to pull up the cold water. And then these tubs are placed in the path of the hurricane. Now, what that's supposed to do is reduce the amount of momentum that it gets as it, makes that last-ditch effort for the shore. So there are actually two ways that they're trying to alter the paths of hurricanes. That's kind of cool. But lastly, on hurricanes, there is one way that Steve mentioned a second ago that there's another picture of hurricane. That's a beast, man. Look at that.
That is a monster.
That's a beast. Okay, so let's get to Reverend Pat Robertson and the tried and true method of preventing hurricanes and see what he has to say, because hurricane flow is coming directly for Pat Robertson. Ironic that it's the same Pat Robertson that said that the natural disasters that wiped out and devastated so many parts of the nation were caused by homosexuals is now headed for Pat Robertson. So let's see what he has to say about that.
Praise God. I don't want that thing to come in. I don't want it to hurt Region. I don't want it to hurt CBN. I don't want it to tear up these beautiful campus. I don't want to tear these trees down. I don't want to see any damage. I don't want a bunch of glass flowing. And I don't want all over this area that's counting on us to pray for them. So I'm going to ask you right now, put your hand out toward the Atlantic, wherever it is, and let's speak a word right now. In the name of Jesus. In the name of Jesus. You Hurricane Florence, we speak to you in the name of Jesus. And we command this storm to cease its forward motion and go harmlessly into the Atlantic. Go up north, away from land, and veer off in the name of Jesus. We declare in the name of the Lord that you shall go no farther, you shall do no damage in this area. We declare a shield of protection all over Tidewater, and we declare a shield of protection over those innocent people in the path of this hurricane. In Jesus' holy name, be out to sea. In Jesus' name.
Okay, Dave.
Thank you, Lord.
Now, look, I don't have an issue with the prayer, if that's how you feel that that's best handled. But what I have an issue with is where he said, I don't want devastation in this area. He didn't say be gone from the coast and go away from the whole place. He said, I don't want devastation in this area.
He's like, just go that way. Just don't hit me, man. You can hit anybody else. Fuck them, but just don't go this way.
Yeah, that's the thing's not my issue.
Can you imagine though, if you're in that congregation? I'd be that one holdout, right? I mean, I'm okay if people want to pray for that kind of shit, though. Not down for that kind of prayer. I'm just not my thing. I think it's bullshit. But I'd be that one holdout, just going like this. And people are like, you don't want to see the hurricane go away. What kind of person are you? You're like, fuck off.
Well, the every example that he gave on the pulpit, and this will be the last thing we say before we transition into the Lost World of Z. But go back and watch it, guys, after this show, and just notice that every example that he gives of things that he don't want to, or that he doesn't want to happen when the hurricane hits, are things that are going to affect the campus of CBM. He says, I don't want glass falling around here because the entire outside of that thing is stained glass. I don't want the pretty trees getting uprooted and taken away. And you notice what was last. The very thing that he mentioned was the innocent people. He went down
Yep.
a list of entire things that he didn't want to get wrecked, and the people were the last thing. Glass, trees,
Got to have priorities,
the
man.
campus.
Come on. Yeah, got to have priorities.
I'm just saying. But yeah, stay safe if you're in the path of flow. If you should be evacuated, if you're not, then I think it's a little bit too late. So just grab onto something. But I almost wanted to do tonight's show like you see CNN and the weather people. I wanted to get like a rubber raincoat and go stand outside and do the show like blowing away back and forth in between screens like they do when every time there's a hurricane. Have you ever noticed that the weather people just have to get out there, no matter how treacherous it is, and show you that it's that bad?
And you always have one or two people swimming in the background, right?
Yeah,
Always.
totally.
You need a good tight black
Okay.
t-shirt for that too.
Oh, I have plenty of
Yeah.
those. That I can do. So without further ado, let's get rolling on tonight. I actually came to find out about Dr. David Anderson on Twitter, and I was pointed your way because I have I don't want to say a conspiracy. I don't consider it a conspiracy belief. But I have one thing that I hold on to, and somebody said that you might be able to like shed some light on the situation for me, and that is the age of the Sphinx. So they sent me your way, started looking into what you do, and I was like, oh, this guy is fantastic. We have to get him on the show. And so, be it that as it may, I did not ask you about the age of the Sphinx because I didn't want you to think I was absolutely crazy and not want to come on.
Oh, we can talk about the Sphinx right now if you like before we get into Z. But
Oh, goody.
Okay, sure. Yeah. What are your thoughts on the age of Sphinx?
all right, so well, a quick background in case so for everyone in the audience, I am an archaeologist. This is what I do as a career, and so I do. But I particularly love talking about these sort of issues that are, either conspiracy bent or paranormal bent, or in some way or another I would call pseudo-archeology. And there's a whole host of folks. I'm going to guess that you're interested in the work of Robert Schoch, who is a geologist who has claimed that the Sphinx is about 10,000 years old, or several thousand years older than the archaeologists have claimed. And he
Sort of.
has claimed that based on what he sees as water erosion on the limestone that makes up the Sphinx. The Sphinx is carved from sort of a natural outcrop of rock, and he sees it as bearing the marks of water erosion. I try to be careful with
Yes.
this because I'm not a geologist. And so I'm in no way qualified to assess his geological assessment of whether that's water erosion or not. I would say that other geologists have looked at it, and there is a published article in a peer-reviewed journal by three geologists. I'd have to double check what the journal is, but it's a journal of geology. And so, in essence, this got through peer review as well, and that article just tears him a new one from a geological perspective and says, absolutely not. This is not water erosion. Uh, as an archaeologist, what I can definitely say is, what Schoch tries to do with that argument is to say that there is an older lost civilization that predates ancient Egypt that must have made the Sphinx. Since if it's much, much older than the pyramids around it, that as an archaeologist, I can say is categorically not true. We actually, and this is where archaeologists aren't always that great about talking about the kinds of evidence that we have. We have oodles of archaeological evidence coming out of Egypt, including stuff that is pre-pharaonic. There's a huge pre-dynastic period that comes of settled village life and farming life and early political complexity that predates all of the pharaohs. We have lots of sites that date to that. And then there are also very interesting sites that are hunter-gatherer sites that date hundreds, if not thousands of years before that. So, in other words, when Schoch says there's this lost super civilization in ancient Egypt that would have built the original Sphinx, we have hunter-gatherers from that time. And we don't have like one or two sites of hunter-gatherers. We have a bunch of hunter-gatherer sites. And in the world of archaeology, it's a lot harder to find the campsite of a group of hunter-gatherers than it is to find a city or a super civilization, if you will. And so,
Mm-hmm.
from that archaeological perspective, his claim that there is an older civilization just does not hold water in any way, shape, or form. There's zero evidence for it, and so if there's zero evidence for that civilization, then that to me adds to my assessment that he must be wrong, or there should be something wrong with his geological assessments.
Yeah, and you know what? I think that I would agree with you on Shock. Like, I don't. He brings up an interesting question, I think, but I don't. Like hang my hat on Shock. I think he goes a little too far out there, and I'm not one of those that subscribe that the ancient civilization, had some sort of technology that was lost over time, or that they were, more advanced than we are. I don't go that far. My questions lie in, and I know it's circumstantial, but number one would be the erosion thing. Number two would be that, as an archaeologist, this, the Egyptians were like obsessed with proportions and symmetry,
Sure.
and the proportions and symmetry of the Sphinx are just like way off with the head and the body of
Sure.
the Sphinx. Two, that in that time frame that they kind of claimed that it or certain people claim that it is the 10,500. It faced dead on the Leo constellation. So to me, since the proportions and it faced that at that particular time, I would venture to say that it was at one time a lion's head and eroded to the point where they had to like recarve it. Now that's pure guesswork.
Sure.
Partly because I think it's it's a cool story. But what would you say to those 2 points?
The proportions argument is absolutely interesting, because certainly it is less proportional than the vast majority of Egyptian sculpture. It's a total hypothetical argument, but what I would say is, it is carved out of a living limestone bedrock. We'd have no idea how big the original hill was, and so it's possible that there just wasn't enough of that original hill to make the head big enough. But that's entirely hypothetical. We have no idea how big it was before they started to carve that hill of limestone.
Sure.
In terms of the constellation, one of the main things I would have to double check that, because whether it would line up with Leo, because there's been a lot of claims in the alternative literature about alignments, and a solid 50% of the time, if you do a little bit of research yourself, they don't necessarily always line up as well as they would claim. Like there's a classic photo out there of 3 planets aligned over the pyramids of Giza. That photo is 100% photoshopped. It is not real, and yet it circles around the internet all the time. The real thing, and I've got an example I thought I might talk about tonight too. The real problem with constellations that I'd say is that we have a tendency to forget that they are cultural in origin and not sort of scientific canon writ large. And what I mean by that is, Leo as a lion, as far as I understand it, I'm not an old world specialist, but as far as I understand it, that is something coming to us out of the Sumerians into the Greeks into the Romans. The Egyptians aren't actually necessarily involved in that, as far as I'm aware. And lo and behold, different cultures draw different patterns with the stars in the night sky. And so we have no knowledge that I'm aware of, and I could be wrong, but this is not my specialty, but I'm not aware of the Egyptians referring to those set of stars as a lion, that they must be a lion, let alone if we're talking about some older civilization that is not Egyptian. At that point, we really have to question whether they would call that particular group of stars a lion.
That's a valid point. I'll give you that. That's very valid.
But you are saying that the
no
3 stars, the 3 stars in Orion Belt, you say they don't have any correlation to the 3 pyramids?
Yeah, no, that doesn't really work very well when you actually try to pull it out. But yeah.
Okay.
And my last point, and then we can move on. It would be, they also were obsessed with documenting everything and making engravings and reliefs about everything that they did, but yet nothing exists about the construction of it.
The Sphinx or the pyramid? The Sphinx in particular?
Yeah, the Sphinx.
Yeah, to the best of my knowledge, we have some really, there's not. There's a really great excavation of the workers' village, and we have some great documentary records about people working at the site and working with the pyramids. But yeah, to the best of my knowledge, there's not anything that has survived. I would point out that There's plenty of documentation, and the Egyptians certainly were interested in documentation. The big problem in the fields of archaeology is that we are dealing with a limited data set, and not everything survives. And so just because we don't have a document describing how the Sphinx was built doesn't mean that there wasn't one, or how the Sphinx was carved, I should say. But we don't have it. We don't have it today. It's certainly true.
I agree. And like I said, I'm not like a fanatic about it. I'm very practical with it. I think I like the questions part of this. This is a conspiracy theory that I can kind of get in, because it has some questions. Like, it's not like, flat Earth or the aliens built the pyramids, where it's just so far out there. But yeah, thanks for answering those.
Sure. Well, let me say too, because one of the things I like to mention is that the reason I got interested in archaeology was actually Graham Hancock's book Fingerprints of the Gods, which covers some of these same topics. And when I first read that book, I thought it was amazing, and that's what fired an interest in archaeology for me, and what led me to go on and study this stuff and do this stuff. And I would disagree with that book today. I would say that it is 95% wrong, but it has a special place in my heart, and I think that I like to keep that in mind, because it's important that whatever fires your imagination, that's great. Let's fire that imagination, then let's have a talk, and let's see what we do and do not know.
Graham, Hank, like I'm like you. When you first hear that story, you get like almost fired up about it, because he paints such a beautiful story in everything that he does. And I followed him up until where he went off the deep end was the Mars, I think. Thing. His other stuff, it can have some ambiguity to it. Like there may be some kind of something there, but then he went total colony on Mars, and I was like, oh no, Graham, why? Why?
Oh, that was Richard C. Hoagland's big thing, right? I mean, he put that whole colony on Mars from way back when they first saw that Sardinia region with the face on Mars, and I actually bought into that. That was back in the that was back in the 70s in the late 70s. I actually, as a kid, thought, oh wow, there's a face on Mars. It wasn't until I got older I realized that his methodology was just crap.
Well, it looked like a face. I mean,
it does look like it in the old.
Yeah, I mean,
yeah. The new one, not so much. But okay, so let's, Dr. Anderson, why don't you make an official introduction of yourself? Let people know where they can find you if they want to either follow you or learn more about you, and
sure.
And then you can lead us down the journey to the lost city of Z.
Yeah, so as I said, I'm a professional archaeologist. I got my PhD from Tulane University down in New Orleans. My sort of traditional primary field of research is studying the ancient Maya. In particular, I really love what we call the pre-classic Maya, which is before they become a state and become sort of fully bureaucratic with entrenched kingships and whatnot. And so I've done a lot of work with sort of very early 500 BC, 700 BC settlements in Yucatan, Mexico, to work with this pre-classic Maya population. What the thing that brought me to you guys, and that we've been talking about and starting with, is that I am fascinated with what today I call pseudo-archaeology. That there are these claims that, and I think it's important. I know, some people get riled up the moment you start calling anything pseudoscience or pseudo-art and whatnot. And to me, it's something I try to be very careful with. I do not critique things unless I have read them, or unless I've engaged with them in some way or another. And this is not me. To the best of my intentions, I do not simply shake a stick and say, no, that idea is wrong, without engaging with it. And it is something that I take very seriously, that pseudo-archaeology is something that takes archaeological materials or objects or buildings, but applies a fundamentally different epistemology or sort of method of understanding those materials than professional archaeologists do. And so sometimes these are spiritual understandings, sometimes these are conspiracy-based understandings. There are a whole host of ways in which people take that data and, usually from my perspective, radically misinterpret it, because they often, the biggest problem here is that there's cherry picking going on. They take one or two examples that work for them and they quickly run away from all the others, or perhaps don't know about all of the others. And this is where I think a lot of audiences get sucked into these theories. If you take some of the classic ancient alien style examples, there's, Eric von Däniken many years ago said, look at, the sarcophagus lid of the Maya ruler of Palenque, Tikal. They looked at this monument and said, it looks like a rocket ship to me. And I think a lot of viewers and readers got sucked into that because it's like, hey, you know, maybe it looks like a rocket ship to me too. But there's no, this is where I say it's being taken out of context, or they're cherry picking, because they didn't bother to go and look at any other examples of Maya art, right? And if you go and look at a whole bunch of other examples of Maya art, you can see how this particular piece fits in several canons and it has repeated themes that show up all throughout other parts of Maya art. And when you start to look at the corpus that it belongs in, it's an image that makes perfect sense as a king falling into the afterlife, and does not work very well for that spaceship thing. So
I
to
remember that
me,
relief. I actually read those books, In Search of Ancient Astronauts and
yeah,
Chariots of the God. Yep. And I got to admit, I was like, well, again, I was a kid, but I was like, hey, this is pretty interesting. But again, goes back to his methodology, right?
yeah, yeah, the methodology picks things out and doesn't engage with everything else. And so to me, this has become sort of an absolute fascination. And in essence, typically with most of these pseudo-archeology sort of things, you know, I can usually debunk them pretty quickly. Like I say, well, actually, here's the other set of data that we should be looking at, and we can talk about it. And yet, despite the fact that it's usually pretty easy to debunk these claims, they are extraordinarily popular. And that's something that has been fascinating over the last several years. And so I've been trying to work in a variety of ways to understand why these things are so popular, why they survive, why they spread when they're so illogical in a sense. And so that's been sort of my major campaign, if you will, in the last couple of years here.
You have the coolest job ever. We were talking beforehand that I'm totally jealous. So we're going to be talking tonight about Captain Fawcett and the Lost City. Now, this was recently made into a movie with the guy from what was that? Sons of Anarchy.
Oh yes,
Charlie.
yes.
So why don't you kind of give us an introduction to the City of Z?
Yeah, so the City of Z and lost cities in general are a pernicious problem. And so what I have done with the City of Z is tried to look into where did this claim come from and how did the claim develop? Because trying for me to sort of talk about these issues is problematic. Because if I just say, well, the City of Z is not real, you know, it's pretty easy for someone to say, well you're just dismissive. And the other problem with the city, lost cities, is if I go looking for it and I don't find it, and I come home and say, well, it's not there, it's not real, then it's very easy for someone to just also say, well, you didn't look hard enough, or you didn't look in the right spot. And so I felt that these claims of lost cities are particularly important to engage with from this perspective that it's a problem of how do we tackle this, because I think this is not true. And so with Z in particular, I spend a fair bit of time trying to dig into what Percy Fawcett claimed and where he got his ideas and what his ideas were entangled with, to try and come away with a better understanding of this. So the basics, you know, especially if we look at it, some people may have seen the movie. You know, what do we have here? We have a story of a 1925 expedition. Several expeditions before that. We have Percy Fawcett, who is a British member of the British military, who becomes a professional surveyor after he's out of the military. And he does a number of surveying expeditions to the Amazon rainforest in South America, mostly in Brazil. And over a course of multiple trips to the Amazon and multiple surveying trips through the Amazon, he develops an idea that somewhere in the heart of the Amazon, there is a massive city. And not just sort of that there were a couple of sites out there somewhere, or a couple of villages. He comes up with this idea that there is a massive city of immense importance buried in the heart of the Amazon that no one has found yet. Does that fit what you guys are thinking, or is that?
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So we can get in. You know, what I try to do is say, okay, where does this idea come from? And there are, you know, a couple of things that are worth pointing out. I think for the first part, you know, most people who have written about Fawcett or talked about Fawcett emphasize his background as a military officer and a surveyor. And I think that those are good things, because in some very realistic ways, that military background and very much helped him learn to survive in an extremely harsh environment in the Amazon. And so that's an important piece to his background. And his training as a professional surveyor is also incredibly important, because this is, you know, he's someone who knows how to take measurements, he knows how to make observations, and he has spent a lot of time in the Amazon. And so I think those are things that give him a lot of credibility in many people's eyes in terms of how they understand him and his claims for this city. Um, but
Makes
there's
sense.
a lot more going on to Percy Fawcett as a spiritualist. That the movie dabbles in a little bit. They show him getting oh goodness, was it a palm reading or a tarot card reading or something in the trenches of World War One? But they kind of they mention it and generally speaking move on from it. But I think it's extremely important to understand that he was deeply involved in spiritualism, and spiritualism was specifically an early 20th century movement. And we know this, his interest in other religions and other spiritualities goes back to his early days in the British military when he served in Sri Lanka, and he was introduced to sort of Buddhism, Hinduism, and not Mormonism, excuse me, no, Islam. And he, in that way, he was exposed to a variety of different religious faiths that he wouldn't have seen at home in England. And at that time, he expressed a great deal of interest in Buddhism and appears to have sort of sworn to uphold the values of Buddhism. And part of that we know he's quite famous for later in life, that he's a teetotaler. He does not drink, and that's in part due to the spirituality that he picked up starting here. But that's sort of the normal run-of-the-mill stuff. He gets deeper involved in some things over the years. While he's still in Sri Lanka, his brother is in India. And we know that his brother was in India with the Theosophical Society. And the Theosophical Society is an esoteric spiritual movement that started in the 1800s by a couple of people, but Madame Blavatsky, Helena Blavatsky, is the most famous. And his brother, Fawcett's brother, Edward, was actually in India with the Theosophical Society, with Helena Blavatsky. And according to David Gran, who wrote one of the big books and who actually had some of Fawcett's papers, according to Gran, Edward actually helped Blavatsky write one of her biggest works, one of her biggest books, the Secret Doctrine. And so he's got some family ties into some extremely, less known, more esoteric spiritual groups. And he repeats interest in these groups as he gets older. And in his writings, when you look at Fawcett's writings about his trips to South America, he is always interested in a ghost story. He always wants to hear about that. He always wants to hear about these sort of spiritual claims. And we know that later in life, I've only got my hands on one of these. They're a little bit hard to find because at least the one I have is published. He published an article in the magazine Light in 1923, 2 years before he went missing. And it's simply titled Obsession. And it is published under just his initials, but it is a remarkable read, and it's very dense. It is entirely arcane, New Age spiritualist writing styles, and he basically in this 3-page treatise goes into depth about how obsession is caused by possession. That people who are obsessed, people who are people who are somehow spiritually compromised. And that they have been possessed by lower entities or other spiritual entities who sort of inhabit part of their soul or part of their body and cause them to have these obsessions. And this is some difficult reading if you haven't read a lot of spiritualist stuff before. It's not easy to figure out what he's meaning or saying sometimes. So Fawcett is deeply embedded in a spiritual community, and that ultimately comes to inform his understanding of Z in a deep and profound way. So the way I tell the story, or the way I tried to break down the story in an article I published on this last year, is that if we look at, all right, where did the idea come from for Fawcett? Why did he think there was something out in this jungle? In the movie, they very much present it as an aha moment, that he finds some pottery and says, "Bam, there you go. There are people here. There used to be more people here." And he becomes convinced that there must be a city or there must be more to find out in the Amazon. That's not a particularly good representation, but he did find objects that intrigued him. He did see pottery. In his published writings, he mentions it. He moves on from the pottery. He doesn't seem to really care that much about the pottery. What he cares about are some other things. So there's one great longer passage in his book about a series of sort of strange metal objects that someone shows him that Fawcett tells us look like Egyptian figurines. Now, there's no picture, there's no drawing. We don't really know what he means other than he says they look Egyptian. And they're made out of metal in some way. And he asks the guy where he got them from or where they came from. He offers to buy them. The guy won't sell them. And the guy is very cagey about telling him where they came from. But this is one of the things that clearly fires his imagination. And when he writes about it, he thinks that these must have come from somewhere special, somewhere big, somewhere that he wasn't quite sure where it was. The object that truly gets the most attention in his memoir, though, and the one that's the most fun, is a black idol, a mysterious black idol, nonetheless. He describes that is sort of I think it's about 10 inches tall, as I recall. So it's handheld sort of thing carved from some dark black rock, and he says that it shows a human figure and has some strange glyphic sort of writing or glyphic design on it. And this intrigues him immensely. He claims that if you hold it, that anyone who holds it, in fact, he said, would feel an electric current running through it. And he takes this idol to a psychic of some kind. He doesn't tell us who, but he takes it to a psychic of some kind who does a reading on the object to tell its history, to tell its story, and who might have held it before him. And the story that comes out from the psychic, as it's published in Fawcett's memoirs, is one that it's a priest took it from a temple and to save it from these rising waters, and brought it off and kept it alive and kept it sacred and holy and sacred and safe. The intention is very clear that this is supposed to be it's from Atlantis. And Fawcett clearly really likes Atlantis. And he mentions it many times in his writings that he believes that there are signs that Brazil and the Amazon are connected to Atlantis in one way or another. And this is like the big object for him, this black idol that the psychic has told him is from Atlantis. And to him is proof that, okay, that now we think there's something out there.
Where do you fall on the Atlantis theory?
It all comes down to Atlantis, doesn't it? Always. It's always the Atlantis.
Very, very frequently.
Yeah.
But that's the some physical evidence that he has. He doesn't have any other stuff. And everything else comes down to things that people told him, and then historical accounts that he reads. And the historical accounts are pretty straightforward. He reads Francisco Orellana's accounts, or the accounts written about Orellana's trip by other people. And Orellana was one of the first Spaniards to cross the Amazon. And Orellana says, there are a lot of people here. And he says that he encounters lots of villages. And he actually claims to encounter a group of warrior women, which is where the whole region gets the name Amazon. And Orellana is one that's interesting because Fawcett, basically by Fawcett's time, most scholars dismissed Orellana's account as exaggerated. They're like, he was just trying to make his trip sound good. And there isn't anything out there in the Amazon. Not that many people could live out there. And so there's Fawcett clearly likes this, that Orellana is being dismissed by the scholars, because Fawcett himself did not like the scholars very much. And so Fawcett sees Orellana and says, hey, he must have been right. There must be more out there. And he has one other historic document, which is pretty funny, that, basically, to the best of my knowledge, no one else has seen or gotten their hands on, but Fawcett claims he got it in the archives in Brazil. And it describes a group of people who had been missing for 10 years, and who, at the very end of their 10-year mission, all of a sudden stumbled across a massive city of great wealth and construction and sculptures and writing. Then they came back to the capital and reported this, and it was sent on to the Portuguese authorities, allegedly. And no one followed up on it, basically. I doubt Fawcett made this up. I'd be surprised if he made this up. But no one from the Portuguese government or the Brazilian government at the time, in any way, shape, or form, took this account seriously. And so, I think there's a little bit of, there's a lot of ways we can imagine this, but one might be, if you really were just missing for 10 years, you probably should come home with a good story to justify why you've been gone for 10 years.
That would make sense.
But,
I just said that would make sense for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, and so and this document's a little problematic because basically it cannot be corroborated by anything, by anyone. Then most of the rest of his belief in Z is based on, in particular, stories that people tell him, and he's told by a lot of people when he's wandering around the Amazon. A lot of the locals, a lot of the indigenous population of the Amazon, allegedly tell him stories about ruins. And they say, oh, yeah, yeah, if you go this way, if you go that way, if you get this cave, you go across that mountain or on the other side of the river, you will find these giant ruins. And it's interesting to me is having worked as an archaeologist and done interviews to ask people where sites are, just quite simply, I can tell you half the time people told me there was a site here, I would go there and there'd be nothing there. Or we'd get all the time where, we get a new guide or knew somebody we were working with, and we would say, hey, can you take us to a site? And they'd say, yeah, but, it's really small. And we'd be like, that's fine, let's go. And they'd take us, and it would be huge. And we'd be like, oh my God, we really wanted to see this. Or we'd get the opposite all the time too, where, you'd ask a guide, take you somewhere, and he's like, yeah, I'll take you this place. It's amazing, it's wonderful, it's huge. And he would take us there, and it would be like piddly a couple of houses, and that's it. Which is okay. We wanted that. We wanted to record that. That's important to us. But having, in essence, personally interacted with people and asked them to tell me stories about ruins, to tell me where those ruins are and what they look like, I have gotten completely inconsistent results every time I have asked those questions. And so for me, when I hear Fawcett saying, yeah, people told me stories about ruins, like my flags go up entirely. We're like, wow, I don't know how seriously you should take. I mean, that they might be true. You should investigate them. I don't say you shouldn't investigate them, but there's immediate problems that go off in my mind. There's also a set of problems that I've detailed that, in terms of Fawcett recounting what people tell him, very clearly, in my opinion, I would say he doesn't have much of a filter. He seems to believe sort of anything anyone tells him. So, as I said, some people may disagree with me here, but ghost stories. People tell him ghost stories, and bam, as far as he's concerned, that's true. To me, that's something like, wow, there should be a higher level of skepticism there, whether that's real or not. But then there's just a host of things. He tells us that the average size of an anaconda is like 30 meters long, when we know today that they're like 10 meters long at best, on average. And so there's a whole bunch of things in here that I've gone through that's like, wow, he doesn't seem to have much filter when people tell him things. He just accepts it and thinks clearly it's real. So the stories of ruins are problematic in that sense. The real problem here, though, and this is the one that gets brushed over by everyone because no one wants to touch it, is where race plays a major component in here. He doesn't think there's a big city in the heart of the Amazon just because of the objects that he has, the history, and the stories he's been told. He very specifically engages with the fact that several people have told him there are white Indians in the Amazon. And he comes back to these stories again and again that he says there are people out there with sort of reddish or auburn with blue eyes. And there's one sort of very specific moment where someone's telling him like, oh yes, my ancestors built cities. And he's talking to someone who's an indigenous person of the Amazon. And in his memoir, he writes, yeah, he told me his ancestors built cities in the Amazon, but I don't believe him because he is of, and I'm paraphrasing, quoting here, this is not me, but he says, I don't believe him because he is of the dark skinned variety. He is not of the auburn hair, the blue eyed variety that I know built these ruins, basically. So he is very explicit that it requires, in his mind, it required a white group of people to be capable of a civilization in order to be built and have a large city in here. There's a very specific component from his worldview that the reason he thinks Z exists is that it is basically has to be whites, which is where we tie into Atlantis, because he thinks that they are Greeks, of the Greek descent from Atlantis, basically. And this is how he massages a lot of his data in the end. And ultimately, the spiritualism comes back in here because he starts in his later years, appears in 1925. He starts to talk about this place as the home of a white temple. And this time, we're not actually talking about race, but a white temple is a theosophical belief. And this is, to go back to the Theosophical Society and this esoteric spiritual group. Fawcett claimed that there was a white temple, which is a repository of esoteric spiritual knowledge that the masters, the Mahatmas, have given to the people, basically. And so he thinks that there is specifically this spiritual hub at the heart of the city of Z that makes it so great in addition to all of this. So he pulls a whole lot of things in here. Like, why does he think Z is real? It's not the pottery. It's these sort of really strange, problematic objects that he has found or been told about. It's not just stories of ruins and not just historical accounts of ruins. It is very specifically tied into that he hears stories about white Indians. And these are the elements he uses to bring together this idea and claim that Z is out there. And towards the ends of his life, he just becomes absolutely, utterly obsessed, as far as we can tell, with that this place must be real and that no evidence will show otherwise. There's some really interesting statements in his memoirs that he wrote. He wrote his final memoir like right before he disappeared, and it was published many years later by his surviving son. And there's some interesting statements. So things along the lines, he says, if a native tells you there are ruins of a city nearby and you don't find them, you should not take that as evidence that the city doesn't exist. So there's a sort of a conspiracy epistemology going on here, or an issue of like, it's real. Whether you find it or not, it's real. It's out there. And these are the elements he brings to the table for Z. I think I've hit the main points.
What do you think? It may be kind of shifting forward a little bit, but when he actually made his trip out there, did he? Let me ask you: how many people did he take with him, and did he have a backup plan in case something happened to him once he was out there?
In the final voyage, how many people were with him?
Yeah.
Just 3. So it's himself, his son, Jack Fawcett. I think it's Jack Fawcett, and a friend of his son's, Raleigh Rimmel. In terms of the precise plans, he actually, I actually love this. He was very conscientious about wanting to keep those precise plans secret. He was worried about being scooped. He was particularly obsessed with, you may be familiar with the history of the exploration of Antarctica. The British explorer. Oh my goodness! I'm gonna have a total
Admiral
brain fart
Byrd?
now here on the.
Admiral Byrd.
Admiral Byrd.
No, that's the Arctic, the Antarctic. It's Roald Amundsen, who's the Norwegian involved here, and there's a famous British explorer who Scott, I believe, we're talking about here. The story
Steve
that happened though is,
Sure.
a few years before this, in essence, the British explorer had done several trips to the Antarctic and was pushing for the sun.
Scott Hosking.
Scott Hosking?
Was that who it was? No.
The Hosking sounds strange to me. We can do it without the names, and I apologize. I'm for the listeners. I am very jet lagged.
That's no problem.
The British explorer was scooped. Basically, he had been spent years of his life exploring Antarctica. He had made previous attempts towards the pole, and when he finally made it to the South Pole, a Norwegian, Roald Amundsen, had gotten there like 2 weeks before him, and so this is something that Fawcett was very sort of broken up about, because he had spent years of his life exploring the Amazon, and he had competitors. He had other people who were also exploring the Amazon and were trying to map all of its corners, and so he was very worried that someone might get to Z before him. So he goes to great lengths to not tell anyone where he's going. So this is part of the reason that no one's ever found his body, is because we don't really know where he went after after Dead Horse Camp, sort of the famous kickoff point.
That's incredible.
He probably died somewhere in the rainforest. That's got some pretty nasty stuff in that rainforest.
Oh yeah, he certainly was an experienced traveler in the Amazon, so it's understandable that every once in a while I was like, no, he's too experienced to have died in the Amazon. It's like, I get it, he's very experienced, but it's a tough place. Like, that is a really tough place to want to live for a long period of time.
What about the images that float around of the shrunken head?
That's alleged to be him. I don't think I've personally seen one that's alleged to be him. Is there one out there that's supposed to be Scott?
Yeah.
Fawcett. Excuse me, Fawcett.
Yeah, Fawcett. See if you can find that, Steve, and send it to Dave. There's like a I can't remember what the plaque underneath him says, but when I was looking up like images to do the thumbnail with, that's where I came across it, and it's terrifying. Let me ask you this. This is kind of a little bit off topic, but just because I'm interested, is that a real thing? Like, can people
Shrunken
really
heads?
shrink heads?
Oh,
Yes.
absolutely. Shrinking heads is absolutely a real thing for select groups of populations in the Amazon, and it's it's something that massively distorts the features of a head and the skin and the hair and everything else. So I would I don't know what it does to DNA either. So I don't know if you could DNA test a shrunken head or not, because DNA is pretty fragile in the end. So, but identifying anyone from their a living person from their shrunken head would inherently be difficult, and I simply I do just looking at it, it would be difficult. I don't know about the DNA. I would Jennifer. Oh, good. I'm gonna stop trying to name names right now from the jet lag. But we would need to get a geneticist right now if we wanted to ask whether you could genetically identify it or not.
That's so. Do you know the process of like how these tribes do that? Like, how would you shrink a head? I'm like blown away
Uh,
right now.
Very minimally. I don't know a whole lot about it. I do know that it involves. There's. I've seen a few of them up close, and there's an incision made along the back of the head that gets stitched up later on. And so, as I understand it, the incision is made, and I believe this. I believe that the skull is removed then, and I know hot sands are involved to shrink it down in one way or another. But I am
It's
on
a
a
long,
limb here.
intricate
This is not something
process,
I know a
right?
lot about.
Yeah, but it is a
Oh
long,
man.
involved process to do this.
Dr. Anderson, we're now looking at an image of the alleged shrunken head. Can you read that plaque, Steve, underneath it?
Yeah, let me pull this up here. It
This
says
is the one
shrunken
that I
head.
saw.
Yeah, shrunken head, unknown tribe, Mato Grosso region, Brazil, alleged to
Mhm.
be the last remains of Lieutenant Colonel Percy Harrison Fawcett in or after 1923.
Yeah, I'll have
And
to look
this
into it.
thing
I'm
is
surprised I hadn't
gruesome.
stumbled across it before. It's there are a lot. The general thing I would caution everyone: there's a lot of strange things on the internet, and it's always worth digging into. How they came to be or how they got on the internet to begin with. So yeah, I'm afraid that's the right region. Mato Grosso is the right region for where he was going, but yeah, I'm not
Well,
sure.
it's probably real shrunken heads. The question would be, is it his? I think more than anything
Sure.
else.
Well, and there are
Yeah.
plenty of shrunken head. Not fakes, that's not the right word, but there are plenty of shrunken heads that are made for the tourist market, actually, which is pretty disturbing. But there was a period of time in the early 20th century where these were being made not as part of actual Amazonian ritual, but being made to sell to people. I used to work at a museum that had one that was clearly, we had like a real one, and we had the tourist market one, and the tourist market one was clearly less well done than the authentic one, if you will. They were both real heads. They were both real people, but they were just done for different reasons by different people.
What is wrong
Not
with?
part of my collections of
Oh
anything.
man.
Yeah, I've never grew up in my life thinking, damn, I really want a collection of shrunken heads. Now, David,
That's
however, I don't know. David, have you ever had that desire to collect shrunken heads?
No, Steve. No, I like my heads
Okay.
properly swollen, but that's a different kind of
Okay.
head.
So does Kyle, right?
Listen to him. Listen to him. Okay, so sorry we got sidetracked on that, but I just like for me, I honestly thought that it was just a myth. It was one of those um, horror stories you hear about tribes in the primitive tribes in the jungle. And whenever I was actually looking for images to do the thumbnail for this show, I realized that they are not a myth. That is a real thing that happens, and that's terrifying, I think.
the biggest myth I would say that comes out of the Americas from contact onward is cannibalism. There are certainly some real cannibalistic rituals here and there throughout cultures of the Americas, but it was like, especially in the 1500s for the conquistadors and whatnot, it was like the favorite slur to just throw out there, was to claim that everyone in the Americas was a cannibal in one way or another. And so there are tons of overstatements about a cannibalism out there, but some of these things did really happen.
Um, Allow me, if you will, to deviate to another kind of exploration, and I guess jungle would be the appropriate word. But have you heard of North Sentinel Island?
I don't think so. Uh, What's supposed to be there?
If you haven't heard of this, you have to check this out. So in the Bay of in the Bay of Bengal in near India, I believe it's like 33 kilometers off the coast of India. There is a island called North Sentinel Island, and it has sat there and not been touched by the outside world since their tribes there are prehistoric. They have not come out of the Stone Age. They haven't even discovered fire yet. The closest encounter that people had to this island was that two fishermen fell asleep in 2006, I believe, and their boat drifted onto the island. They were instantly shot with arrows and killed. And then when a helicopter came in to pick up their bodies, they couldn't get the bodies because the tribe came out and were shooting the helicopter with bows and arrows. So these people have not been contacted ever. Like there's no outside influence into that's kind of that tribe. So I'm just trying to think of what that would be like to be on that island and this massive helicopter come roaring over you trying to lift these bodies up out of a boat.
Sure. Yeah, and it's the particular here I don't know, but there's often these so-called uncontacted tribes in the Amazon as well to this day, and it's in general in the Amazon. What anthropologists find is that these uncontacted tribes tend to know more about the outside world than we want to give them credit for, and so I'd be curious, to know how much people on this island know about the outside world, because they probably know more than we think they do, but. And are
I don't see
perhaps
how they
quite happy.
would. They're completely isolated. They have no contact. In fact, I think there's a law even says you can't be within a certain amount of
You
distance
can't
from
be
it.
within 30 miles of the island.
Yeah.
Sure.
So, I mean, I don't know where they would gain any of this knowledge from. There's no egress or anything from to the island.
Sure, and the
Can't leave
question
it.
for me
Get
would
to
be
it,
how
no
often are
ingress.
there illicit contacts? Because, like, we see this with the uncontacted tribes in the Amazon every once in a while with these drone photos that keep coming out every once in a while, or helicopter photos, and not all of those, but a lot of those are photos that weren't supposed to be taken, and so there's always a question of, the people end up on the island that weren't supposed to be there. We don't know, but it'd be fascinating to know what life's like there.
It would be, because like I said, they and it was funny because they're going through. This is why like your job would be so cool to have, because you get to deal with this every day. But when that boat crashed, they were still in the Stone Age, and what the what like helicopter images saw after several months of that boat crash, they were actually pillaging that boat and taking the metal off of it and putting it in the tips of their spears. So that boat introduced the Iron Age onto that island. They're now went from the Stone Age to the Iron Age, but they have not yet discovered fire.
Yeah, they're about 15,000 years behind us. But the question is, there's only like 50 to 100 of them. They say there's not many of them. So there's a moral implication is if that civilization can even survive much longer with those lower numbers, is it even viable?
Certainly, with a population that level, it's problematic.
Do you intervene too? What would be
That's
your
the moral question? Do you intervene?
Yeah.
Well, I think one of the things I would say here is that we have a tendency to look at culture as in sort of outside of my field. There's a tendency to look at things like, culture's about traditions or things that don't change, or we want to preserve, like our language or our pastimes or our traditions or our religion. And when you get into the world of studying culture from an anthropological perspective, which archaeology is rooted in, what we tend to notice very quickly is that actually culture changes all the time. Trying to stop culture from changing is actually incredibly difficult to do, and if not impossible. So this is one of those where I lean towards the intervention, because the non-intervention argument usually is, well, we need to preserve that culture as it is. And to me, that already to me is a bit of an artificial argument, an artificial statement, because that culture is constantly changing. It changed when that boat crashed. It changed when a helicopter flew over. We saw new things happen, and it changes when somebody new is born on that island and has a different idea of how things should be done. And if there's a no-go zone around that island, there's a question of, would they let somebody leave that island? And all of a sudden, when we set up these human preserves, this is sort of the problem in the Amazon. When you set up a human preserve and say no one's allowed in, all of a sudden you're also starting to lean towards no one's allowed out either. And that's when I feel like the non-interventionist issue becomes a little bit scary sometimes. And so
Mm,
I am of a mind that intervention is not necessarily a bad thing.
that's a good point. And,
I
like
think that makes sense. Yeah.
my mind goes to we deal with a lot with religion on this show, and
Hmm.
I think what would a tribe that is used to, I mean, they don't even have fire, if they're just used to seeing what the forest is like around them every day, and then you have this big metal bird come just spiraling out of the sky, and humans that look kind of like you, they're not the same color, but they look kind of like you, piloting it. What do you think in terms of what that is? Because their minds obviously can't process that it's a helicopter and that these people are actually just flying this machine. So, I mean,
Sure. Well, we're
that
definitely verging on the classic ancient alien argument here that I deal with as well sometimes. And it's definitely going to be something that is hard to comprehend because it's something so new to you. And a lot of, this is the territory where the ancient alien theorists start to immediately jump to, well, they could not understand that. And my bias as someone who ultimately have a degree in anthropology is to the structure of the human mind is no different. The number of brain cells, the number of shapes, the number of neurons has been the same for thousands of years. And what we see from one human group to another is a difference in education, not intelligence. So it's difference in
hmm,
knowledge of what people are familiar with, and not just how quickly or how well can you process information. And so I like to think that, what, these, if they saw that boat that crashed and said, that's got metal that could be useful to us, and they see a helicopter that flies over them, that should be something they can see and interpret, and not immediately fall into a "I cannot know what that is" sort of argument.
I can see that. That's interesting.
I,
Hmm.
I need to
So many
apologize, gentlemen,
questions.
because I've greatly enjoyed this, but my next bus is coming up, and I have some battery issues here, and so maybe we should wrap this up before I all of a sudden
Oh
disappear on you.
yeah, yeah. I'm
Okay.
sorry. I forgot all about that. You were still waiting on your way home. I apologize for that. I'm
Yes.
just sitting over here droning on
Oh,
about.
not at all, not at all.
But yes, this has been great. Do you want to, before you cut out, let everybody know where they can find you, and your Twitter and that sort of thing?
Yeah. Absolutely. So if you want to find me and talk to me or contact me, and I encourage anyone to do, the easiest way is straight up on Twitter, and I am DSA Archaeology on Twitter. And I really do like engaging and talking about all of these sort of things. And so if you've got a theory you've heard about that you think might be a little bit kooky, or you might even really want to believe but you have questions about, please send me a message or tweet at me, because I try to answer all questions when I can. And as I say on Twitter in general, it's like I'll tell you what I think. You might not always agree with me, but I'm happy to tell you what I think.
That's the way to be. That's the
You know?
philosophy of life, I think. But we'd love to have you back on to tackle another topic sometime, and then maybe we can have the fans pick one for us.
Absolutely, that'd be fantastic.
All right, Dr.
Yeah,
Anderson. Thank you very
this
much
was interesting.
for stopping by,
Well,
and you have a safe
well,
trip home.
thank you so much, and thank you guys for your patience. I know it took several months to get this to happen, so thank you very much for having me.
It was
Worth the
well worth
wait.
it,
Thank
sir.
you, Dr. Anderson. Yep.
You take
All right,
care.
thank you guys. Have a good night.
Good night.
Bye.
Steve, you have any super chats?
We did have one or two. Let me actually bring them up here. Give me like 5 seconds here. While we're doing
And
that,
guys,
you
if you
want
have
to
any
announce? You want
questions,
to go over things that we're going to be coming up? I didn't say any questions, but I'll fill the questions and I'll get some super chats. If you want to go over what's going to be coming up here soon.
yeah, Sunday, if you haven't seen already, we've got porn star Mercedes Carrera.
Galera. Mercedes Galera.
Yeah,
I
she
won't
is
be able to
going to
say it
be
right, even though I took Spanish, but it's Carrera.
she's going to be joining us to talk about stereotypes in porn. And I didn't know this until researching her. I did some thorough research all day today and then last night. She's actually very big and did several streams on net neutrality. So that will be an issue that we can touch on too.
Great subject.
There was a yep. So we're very excited to have her.
And she has She has very large, beautiful, round, succulent eyes. By the way, so they're just
She does.
gorgeous eyes. Yeah.
And boobs.
Esta-
Don't forget the boobs.
and yeah, the boobs aren't too bad either. Yeah. Sandring Pearson, $20. I keep away from fictitious comments from now on. Casey was not amused. Yeah, that was I think a shout out to the yesterday where I think Sandring. I think she got the idea that Sandring wanted her to die on camera, which wasn't his goal.
Oh
Nobody
no,
wanted you to
she
die.
knew this.
Yeah,
She
nobody
knew it
wanted
was
her to die
joking.
on camera. But if you were to die on
She knew it was
if
joking.
anybody does die on camera, make sure just get some ratings out of it. That's all. That's all we ask.
Or your well, I'm not even gonna say that. That'll be I'll never hear the end of that if I let that out. Go ahead, Steve.
Actually, that's kind of it. So it's kind of hard to get any questions because our guest had to go. But if you do have any questions in the live chat, maybe we can field something. Or if you have any suggestions for next time he's on, that's great too.
Ironically, Kyle actually did research. Oh, fuck you.
Kyle likes these types of archaeological things. I do very little research, but I'm familiar with these topics only because I've looked into them in the past, right? So when you mention things like that island, I've looked at that island before.
I like the strange stuff. I like things that are they don't really have a immediate explanation for them.
I like the things that have had no explanation that have been explained later on. It's like, we've now understand how this works, or we've now discovered what this is. So things do get explained.
Yep. And I'm excited about simulation theory. We're going to be doing that coming up. We're going to be doing Electric Universe the next month. Yeah, Paula Gia and Mike Winger are going to be debating in a couple of weeks on the evidence for the resurrection. SJ and Godless Engineer. Who else we got? Got a big old list of good shows coming up. David Pacman, Logic.
We got. Did you mention Ron?
Yeah,
Ron Miskevich.
Ron.
Okay.
He's up there on the slideshow, I think.
Okay, we have obviously Soul Phone coming up. That's in a couple weeks. We got. Let's see what else we got. How about the Black Hebrew Israelites thing? That's coming up.
Yeah, that's on the 24th of Monday. I think that's going to be with Vocab Malone. It's going to be with your friend. What's his name?
Atheist?
He calls me king. No, the Hebrew Israelite. He always calls me, like, he says peace. The nicest guy on the planet.
I do know. I do know. Yeah, I do know. Yeah, he's a nice guy. I just can't think of his name off the top of my head. I do know to whom you're referring to.
And we'll say this before we close out, guys. If you or someone that you love is affected by a strange, unexplainable or explainable, but they just won't get it, belief, whether it be viruses don't exist, dinosaur bones or fossils never were a thing, anything strange and outside the ordinary, we would like to know who they are and how to get a hold of them, because we've got something, not really like a tournament, but a really cool kind of new way to debunk pseudoscience that we're going to try in November. So bring us your craziest. I want to make something like a powerful, motivating speech, like that. Give us you're tired, you're hungry. Give us your crazy, your bizarre, you're weird.
We just want to find some fucked up people.
Come
That's
into
basically
me, all
boils
ye
down
that
to.
are crazy, and I will give you rest. There we go.
I mean, and of all the people we have had on, he wants to find people that are even more fucked up. You see what we're trying to do here?
I do, because if I can get it, like, everything to go like I want it to, this will be fantastic. Also, guys, starting on, I believe we're going to start on Saturday. After the private hangout, by the way, we are having a private hangout on Saturday if you are a Patreon. A lot of stuff to go over there. And the patrons are actually going to be involved in the Golden Nuns. Our patrons are going to be not only there to present categories, but also help us narrow down the final fields once we get those together. But we'll go over all of that on Saturday in the private hangout. The first categories you'll be able to vote for this weekend. We're going to start with the Creator of the Year, Video of the Year, Our Show's Guest of the Year, and Dumpster Fire of the Year. And the way that that's going to work is we're just going to have the categories. You're going to be able to put in whatever name that you want. That way we're not picking, like, we're not stacking the deck. We're going to open it up to whoever you want. You'll enter the name. The top 4 of each category will then go into, we'll release those, and those will be the people that it'll come down to. So you'll see, like, the nominees it'll be the top 4. Go ahead.
Uncle Ned is asking, will Soul Phone be another Jilly Juice? Well, we hope not. Soul Phone we've talked a few times. However, as Kyle noted at the beginning of this broadcast, Jilly Juice has not let this go yet. She is still talking about this on Facebook. She's still milking this for all it's worth. And even though she did not come on this program, she still is quite happy that she got some publicity out of it. And she is milking it. So
here's what I'm going to say to Jilly Juice. And it's unfortunate that things went the way that they did, but I understand why things went the way they did. I have a feeling that she thought initially this was going to be a friendly, like, same side show. We were going to, push her product, and she wasn't going to get any pushback from it. And I think she looked for because what I found out was that she decided not to come on because of my joke about I'm going to get dick pics and hold them up and see if I still react to them after I drink the juice. And my whole thing back to that was, number one, I didn't get offended when she's making these claims that she can cure, who I am as a person with some fucking cabbage and salt. So I don't think it was very professional to do what she did. However, if you want to, Jilly, and you want to come on here and you want to either talk about some of the things that we said Tuesday, or you want to, you think we painted you in a negative light, we're going to extend an invitation for you to come back. I'll bring Mel back on. I know that you don't like Jeff Holiday, so I'll just bring Mel on, and you can confront some of the things that were talked about and show us where we were wrong. Now, I don't think that she will, because she doesn't have anything to back up any of her claims whatsoever, and she can't refute anything that we said. But in the shocking turn of events that she can, that invitation's open, and you will be treated cordially and professionally, and we will let you get out what you have to say, and then you can maybe answer some of our questions. So that's there if you want to.
I don't know if she watches this, obviously, but I did post some things on my Facebook. But if anybody that has contact with her on her Facebook will extend to her the offer that Kyle just put out there, we will give her fair treatment. We'll be professional about it. I understand her reasoning as well, but I think that she took it as a perfect opportunity to back out. And I put on my Facebook page, we've had over 200 live streams with a whole variety of type of guests from one extreme to the other. And we are known for allowing certain people to come on to have these types of conversations. And it wasn't just to play a game of gotcha with her. We really want to know why she believes the way she does. And we'll allow her to express her views of why she believes this stuff actually works, and then talk to Mel, because she did at this point challenge Mel. She actually has said Mel is not qualified, blah, 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 blah. And Mel is taking this and running with it now. So it would be a perfect opportunity for her and Mel to actually sit down and talk about this.
It pisses me off some. Obviously, just the arrogance and the undeserving bravado that some people have to look at somebody and say you're not a scientist, yet you sat on a live stream, shat yourself, and laughed about it. You're calling somebody not a scientist. Get the fuck out of here.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing.
In the live chat, what are our comments about the AIG debate and Dr. Mays? We understand. Yeah, I know that you're probably got a little bit more to say on it than I do. Just from my aspect of it, I didn't really care for blaming what happened between the two of them on a lag. because that was not their disconnect. Anybody watching that could see that was not the disconnect. I think that's a surprising sort of shift of blame I didn't really expect. So that was troubling. But he did mention that he wants to do a round 2. We are more than happy to do that. And hopefully this one can be a little bit more, what's the word?
Productive?
Less evasive.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it took me by surprise too that he had brought up some kind of technical difficulties. Honestly, we really didn't have that much problems. I understood both of them just fine. There was really no communication issue between them, except for the fact that Dr. Mays, who has read his book twice, he was asking him questions right out of the book and basically trying to establish a baseline for what Dr. Jensen's arguments actually are and what predictions that he says that he has made that we would expect to see given that young Earth creationism is true. He wanted to talk about coalescence theory. He wanted to talk about neutral variance. He wanted to talk about how amino acids change over a period of time to get these molecular clocks, and how mitochondrial DNA changes with respect to nuclear DNA. He wanted all these questions answered, but Dr. Jensen seemed to default only to one thing: you didn't read the book. When we all know Dr. Mays did read the book. I've gone over it with. I mean, we've talked about it in real time. He read the book, and so I thought it was a little kind of a cop out for Dr. Jensen. Now, I do appreciate the fact that he didn't slam us, right? I mean, there was some kind of implicit thing in there that basically we were okay. He didn't praise us by any stretch of the imagination. I mean, he said right out.
Well, I understand that too. I understand that.
Yeah, I know. I get that. I honestly did. This is not a slight against him. He did say that we were against young creationism, which was true. Fair enough. And the fact that my point was the fact that he didn't slam us is good, because I'm not expecting him to praise us, but he did say that he would come back for a round 2. That means that obviously we treated him fairly, and I think that the audience got that impression
and we did.
well. So
we did.
Yeah.
Absolutely. We worked. We were very impartial in terms of the setup and making sure that he got everything that he needed in a timely. It wasn't that. There's this thing that people think that we stack the deck or try to go out of our way to handicap one side. The side that usually we're on doesn't need handicapping. I mean, when you're on the side of a globe Earth and on the side of evolution and those things that have demonstrable evidence behind them, you don't have to work to stack the deck. I mean, it's already stacked.
Yeah, you never have to. I mean, there's no reason to. And we also let people kind of hang themselves if you don't notice. They'll make their own arguments, and we'll just kind of question about it, and they'll end up basically screwing themselves over.
That was my.
We don't stack the deck.
The fallacy that Dr. Jensen committed the most was the argument ad nextlidium fallacy.
Or the argumentium never read my bookium.
Yeah. So you can never win that way. You can never win. But yeah, that's our show. I think we'll be back with the old set tomorrow. This was just because it was going to be me and Steve. So I did it looks like a Persian store, an IKEA, and a garage, like all had a bukkake fest, and out came our
kind of like an illegitimate love child of like a Verizon store and a AutoZone or something.
Yeah. So yeah, I might see you guys tomorrow. Hopefully, I will. If I have power, I will see you. If not, then we'll get somebody to take my place, and Steven, that person, can hold down the ship.
Pat Robertson he already prayed it to go another way. You'll be fine, dude.
Oh, that's right. That's right. I forgot.
Oh shit, you're gay. It's heading right for you. It's heading right fucking for you.
I'm kind of I'm not gonna say that either. I have to be more mindful of the things that I say. But I find it ironic that the man who said that Hurricane Sandy and Hurricane Katrina and all that were caused because of the homosexuals, and now heading straight to him is the biggest hurricane to ever hit, or the most catastrophic hurricane to ever hit.
If it destroys that building,
for CBN.
Is it gone past it? I mean, where is it in locale to
I don't
CBN
know.
right now? Okay,
Um,
I'm about to look
I
that
don't know,
up.
but if it happens, that might just shake my atheism a little bit. I might think that there might be a divine guy
Be
with
like,
a
thank
sense of
you.
humor up there, going, Pat Robertson, you just been a dumb motherfucker too long. Like it's time to go.
I tell you what, if God flips off Pat Robertson, even I will be like, good one, big guy, good one.
Speaking of
Just
Pat
go back.
Robertson, I have
Yeah.
proof he's not real.
He's not real.
I have proof he's not real. He's like Max Headroom. You guys remember Max Headroom?
Oh, sure.
Oh,
Yeah.
I remember him.
I'll bring it up. I found him. I dug him up.
Believe God.
Let's see your evidence.
Believe God. Believe God. Believe
Amen.
God.
I agree with you now.
Believe God. Believe God. Believe God.
He's telling you people what to do.
Oh, that's
Max
hilarious. Nicely done, Dave. Nicely done. Just go back and watch. Go back and
Glitch in the Matrix.
watch the prayer. We'll leave with this. Go look at Pat Robertson's his priorities. Right, what he prays for. Write down the order in which the items he wants protecting from God in order: the stained glass, the trees, the beautiful campus.
The people last place, somewhere in the
people
bottom.
last. The innocent
And the
people.
Yeah.
Yep. So,
He
yeah.
says a piece
Thank
of
you,
shit.
Pat.
I'm sorry.
Thank you, Pat Robertson. No offense, and I hope that everybody's evacuated, but I hope it levels the fuck out of CBN. I hope there ain't a splinter left for you to walk in to work on Monday.
I'm an agnostic, and I support that. So,
So,
I honestly
all right, guys.
don't.
Thank you for joining us. With any hope, I'll be back tomorrow. If not, you guys take care. And remember, Patreon hangout on Saturday, private. We've got a lot to talk about, and you're going to help us set the course for NonSequitur in the fall. Until then.
Good night.
Believe God. Believe God. Believe God. Believe God. Believe God.
Non sequitur. Your facts are uncoordinated.